Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to everybody who's on the West Coast. My name is Ray Van Iterson. I'm with the United States Postal Service. Really appreciate you joining us today to talk about secrets to omnichannel success. What gets measured gets optimized. Today, really pleased to bring together speaker from Gardens Alive and also from Measured to talk about this important topic today as the world is getting a lot more complicated in our omni-channel campaigns. And I also wanted to thank our media sponsor for this event, the Printing United Alliance. Printing United publicizes all of the different ways that one can use print in omni-channel campaigns. And they also run an enormous conference. It's in Atlanta this year. So if you're interested in learning more about printing, they're a good place to look into. But now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Ellen Pullman, who is the Enterprise Director of Brands from Gardens Alive. And we also have Cara Manion, the Senior Director of Product from Measure, who can enlighten us all about this topic of measurement. So now let's get going. First, let's introduce our panelists. Ellen, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and Gardens Alive?
Sure. So I'm Ellen Pullman. I've been in the omni-channel world since the mid-'80s. Have seen a ton of change. I've been with Gardens Alive for the last 2.5 years, and they're multi-brand horticulture and gift company with a lot of marketing channels, a lot of brands, a lot to play with. So I'm looking forward to the next hour.
Great. Cara, can you tell us about Measured, please?
Sure. So, hey guys, I'm Cara. Thanks for having me, Ray, and USPS. I'm a product manager here at Measured. I've been here for about 2 years, but my background is in the retail and marketing space. So at Measured, we are a media optimization platform. So we work with 130 plus leading D2C brands to help them optimize their media spend across a variety of different channels. We do that through compiling all of their data and transforming it into a portfolio view. We have a variety of automated experiments that can unveil incrementality. And then ultimately we have tools that our brands can use to make decisions and optimize their media spend across their portfolio.
Perfect. And thanks for being here because, obviously today, one of the key aspects that we're talking about is how we're able to measure omni-channel campaigns. And it's a fairly complex subject. So we appreciate having an expert here to help us with that. Before we get into the discussion of omnichannel, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we can really target the information we're providing to everybody here today. So first, what we want to just do is have a poll and ask you about which channels that you currently use. So just take a couple of seconds, and if you can tell us, are you using audio, catalog and direct mail, display, email, search, social media, TV? Just let us know what different channels everybody's using. We'll give that about 15 seconds for people to fill on in, and then we'll share the results and let you know who your colleagues are. Okay, so what we're seeing is that 80% of people are using catalogs and direct mail, 75% email, 75% social media. Cara, I see you're nodding your head. Any comments? Is this kind of what you tend to see when you're talking to your customers?
Absolutely. Yeah, we work with a variety of customers today that this is pretty much typically the mix that we see. They have a vast majority of their activation is occurring in the catalog and direct mail channel. Of course, they're sending emails on top of that. They're investing a lot of their budget into social media as well. So understanding that interactive effect across all of those omni-channel campaigns is something that we really strive to build the technology to solve here at Measured.
Perfect. So what we're going to do today is we've got a few slides that we'll sprinkle in, but primarily this is just going to be a conversation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing and we'll just have a conversation for a while, and then we'll start pulling up a couple of slides as it makes sense. And so let me do that. So now let's just start having the conversation, and let's talk first about omnichannel. If we're going to talk about measurement, let's make sure we know what we're talking about, and we know we're talking about why people are using it. Ellen, at Gardens Alive, what channels do you use, and why do you use the channels that you use?
It's a great question, Ray. I think the first thing I want to say is I want to make sure everybody in the audience understands what incrementality is. So we as marketers are choosing how to spend our marketing dollars. And what incrementality says is, if I didn't spend this marketing dollar, would I have still gotten the conversion, the order, the sale? So currently at Gardens Alive, we use a lot of print. We've got catalogs, we've got what we call solos, which could be trifolds, they could be cut sheets, we've got postcards. We do email and SMS. We do all kinds of search, brand, non-brand, PLAs, organic. We do social. And then we also, utilize our website to do some additional marketing as well. So those are the channels we currently use. And the question why, we're kind of machines that are trying to maintain this very healthy engine, which is our customer file. And in order for our customer file to be as healthy as possible, we need to be bringing in lots of new customers. And then we need to be understanding the data provided within those new customer transactions to understand who to invest in and how. Some of our customers love email and SMS. Others of our customers love print. And, early on when online became popular, there was a lot of converting from offline to online. And at this point in the life cycle, we don't see that much of that. If you're in the offline camp, you're pretty firmly grounded there, and vice versa. I mean, there's a group of customers that float back and forth, but for the most part, we do not see a lot of movement today. And so our job as marketers is to meet our customers where they're at and reduce barriers to converting, and also to have our eyes wide open and understand truly, as we spend $1 on marketing, what are we getting back for it? So that's where my friend Cara comes in.
Excellent point. Yeah. So really broadly, our customers are really trying to solve for two use cases. One, they want to acquire customers, obviously, as efficiently as possible. So they want to make sure they get back their return on investment on acquiring those customers over some sort of lifetime value time horizon. And then secondly, they want to maximize the value of their existing customers, all of that first party data that they've spent so much money and spent so much time and so much effort and resources acquiring all of that customer data. They want to make sure that they're maximizing the value of those customers in their file. And that, just like Ellen said, we're meeting them exactly where they are. So that means really talking to them with the combinations of media that are more likely for them to respond to. If Cara likes receiving email, let's send Cara an email. If Ellen likes receiving a Facebook ad, then let's send Ellen a Facebook ad, for example.
Perfect. And, when some of the research that we've done, when we look at some of the different channels, you find that, a display ad, the cost per impression of a display ad, the cost per click, is less than a penny. But at the same time, that the response rates don't tend to be very high. Conversely, you compare that to some of digital video or TV or direct mail, the cost per impression tends to be higher, but the response rates also tend to be higher. Ellen, when you're thinking about how you're combining your different campaigns, your different channels that you're integrating at a time, how do you think about which channels do you use to reach that particular person?
Yeah, so I mean that's like the secret sauce, right? To try and pull apart. My pot of soup needs every ingredient. Every ingredient is essential. And so, as Cara mentioned, we're looking at return on ad spend. We're also looking at lifetime value. And so we need some of everybody. We need some of the less expensive transactional customers to come in And we need to recognize that they're not necessarily who we're going to want to invest a lot of subsequent marketing dollars on. And we also need people that have the potential to be loyal, because without that, that is such an integral part of that well-running engine. And so it's really the balance of how much are we spending? What are we getting? What are we getting today? And what are we going to get in the next 18 months, 12 to 18 months? I'd also like to know where you're able to click for a penny. Our clicks are probably more in the 30-something range than a penny. So yeah, it's balancing it, but it's also doing a lot of testing, because we sit in a room and we all have these preconceived ideas of who our customers are and their pathways that they're taking to purchase. But until we actually enter the discipline and incorporate the testing, we don't know. We're guessing. And so we're very disciplined about trying to make sure that we've got very specific questions we're looking to answer, and we've got very structured tests and testing practices. And then, we take that information and we ask the next question. And we also recognize that the answer we got, it might not be the answer next year. It might not be the answer in the off season. And so there is really a never-ending supply of questions to answer and tests to run.
That's a great point, Ellen. And someone in the audience just asked a question around, our reliance on direct mail versus email or SMS and social media with supply chain issues and rising rates of media. And I think that for you guys, at least in our work that we've done with you and my work that I've done with other brands as well, what we found is that a diversification across your portfolio of different channels, and there's a place for every single channel across your entire customer file or across whatever your business objectives are, whether that be prospecting or retention. And it's about doing enough experimentation to figure out exactly where we want to be activating certain types of channels. And then furthermore, to your point, in terms of knowing what's working this year might be different than next year. So being really smart and deliberate about making decisions about where we're testing, why we're testing, get the question answered that we actually sought out to answer with our experimentation, and then continue to iterate and experiment from there. As the market changes and as your business dynamics, of course, change, that will also, of course, flex in terms of where you might be investing your media spend.
Perfect. And, so I think that we got a very clear answer that, more channels can lead to higher response rates. It can lead to more purchases, higher lifetime value. Lots of goodness happens when you involve more channels. However, when I talk to people, especially, people who have a history on the direct mail side will tell me, I know how to use direct mail. These digital channels, they're kind of scary, not so sure that I know how to do them, complicates the world. Similarly, I talk to people from the digital side, they say, hey, I know how to use all these channels, but TV or radio or direct mail, these are a different way of doing things. Ellen, can you tell me whether or not, you've had challenges in combining different types of channels and how you've dealt with them, and how have you been able to use the same data customer file in order to target people in multiple across those channels?
Yeah. So again, we have an unbelievable amount of data. We do a lot of data analysis. We do a lot of testing. Our data analysis shows us, like, we mail a catalog out, and a portion of those people order by clicking through a product listing ad on search, a significant portion. So we know that for that percentage of customers, they're going to get a piece of direct mail. They're going to see something that interests them. They're going to go online. They're going to search for it. And we have to be there. If we're not there, we just spent a lot of money to hand a sale off to one of our competitors. And so it's really understanding the incrementality piece. What is driving the sale? If we eliminated that piece of print, what orders would we not receive? And so in reality, we really can't afford to not be there. And we really can't afford to keep our eyes closed when we go there. Because if we don't truly understand what we're getting back for what we're investing, we're in really dangerous waters. And so it's balancing, it's figuring out, how do I optimize my media spend so that I maximize the orders, I maximize the return on ad spend, and I put some money on the bottom line. And it's complicated. And that's why the very rigorous testing, whether it's A/B testing, whether it's holdout testing, whether it's geo testing, but the testing is imperative. In the older days, testing was like a nice way to learn something. Today, from where I sit, it's whether I'm going to stay in business or not. It's so essential to our livelihood. And so, we take our customers, we break them apart between those who are open to getting email and SMS from us and those who are not. And then we move forward with our testing and we look at our audiences. We look at recency, frequency, monetary, email ability, and we also look at where they're passionate within category. And we use all of it, and seasonality, and we use all of it to try and come up with the winning equation.
Cool. Cara, your clients, are they experiencing challenges adding new channels, and any key secrets that you've learned from them?
Absolutely. So similar to some of the challenges that Ellen was talking about, all of our clients are currently struggling with, how should I be activating my customer file across multiple different channels? I might have at my organization, for example, a channel manager that's focused on catalog, another channel manager that's focused on email and or SMS, and perhaps a third channel manager that might be focused on paid social media. How do I figure out what is the right way to target my house file across all of those different channels? Instead of just putting up a first-party audience on Facebook and sending emails to every single person in my list and sending catalog to every single person in my house file, we want to figure out, to really decompose that, to figure out by recency, frequency, monetary, and of course, other variables as well, what's the optimal contact strategy of each of those different media touch points in order to get people to respond most profitably. There might be some trade-off, of course, in terms of if you want to reactivate a lapsed buyer, for example, catalog might be the right way to do that. It gets them to respond. It might be a little bit more expensive, but that's the way that you can get them reactivated into your brand. And then for other customers, a Facebook ad or perhaps an email or an SMS or a combination of all of those things together is what really will get someone to respond and move the needle for your business.
Perfect. And so now that we've sort of set the stage, want to move on and talk about measurement first, and want to initially talk about sort of measuring individual channels. And before we sort of talk about sort of conceptually how you do it and what some of the channels are, I want to just first share some data that came from Cara and measured of looking at what the return on ad spend is across different channels. Cara, here your return on ad spend, your data looks like there seems to be a fair variation between TikTok that's sort of at a 0.3 return on ad spend across some of the others that are more in the 2 range, ranging up to the higher 2s. Can you talk to people a little bit about how you're able to get this kind of industry-wide data from all of your customers?
Sure. So because we work with 130 direct-to-consumer brands, we have transaction data across all of those brands that we are able to create a benchmark for. So we are able to uncover how media is performing across all sorts of different brands. And then, of course, we can cut it and slice it by different industries, by AOV, by different categories, et cetera. So what we're looking at here is an average of our return on ad spend for different channels. And what we're seeing here is that direct mail and catalogs is a very high return on ad spend channel, which we do see to be true. But that is likely because a lot of our brands are really nailing the frequency, the targeting, the reach, the ad format, the creative, right? They're figuring out exactly what combinations of all of those different factors are right to go into their direct mail and catalog program. And a lot of that has been uncovered through some of the incrementality testing, the test and control holdout type testing that we've done with them here at Measured. So they're able to either increase their ROAS overall for the catalog channel, or of course become more efficient. But again, there's always a place for that direct mail and catalog. It's more about the diversification. We also have a variety of other tests that are allowing our brands to understand where they could potentially scale their media spend. So they might not be spending enough on a certain channel. They might need to scale into TikTok, for example, because their audience just happens to be there and it drives a lot of incremental profitability for their brand. And there's other opportunities, of course, to be more efficient. So sometimes a brand might look at a benchmark and they might find that they're spending far over what the industry standard is for a certain channel or tactic. And we help our brands figure out where they can kind of reduce and find scale opportunities. And of course, overall, just optimize their media portfolio and their budgets.
Cool. So I know we've, when we're having sort of the broad discussions, that measurement really came up a number of times, but really want to sort of build this in building blocks. Ellen, can you talk to us about, with the different channels that you use, how do you measure individual ones? So are you looking at click-through rates? Are you looking at coupon code redemption? What are the different ways that you use to measure when you're just thinking about the individual channels? And then we can talk more about sort of how you look at the different channels one against each other in an omni-channel fashion afterwards.
Sure. So prior to working with Measured, we very much relied upon our key coded data, our matchback data. We used the vendor data within each of our platforms. And we knew that we were double and triple counting, we reached this point where we just said, like, this, it doesn't make sense. It's not helping us be more profitable. It's not helping us reach our goals. And so we started working with Measured about 1.5 years ago, maybe close to 2 years at this point. And we had very specific questions of what we were unable to measure on our own and where we needed help. And so with the capabilities of Measured and implementing universal holdouts and incremental holdouts and doing geo-testing, we were able to take some of those blind spots of significant spend. We really looked at it in terms of where are we spending the most dollars and where could we be much more efficient than we are. And it's like the big reveal. It's the big, slow reveal. But layer by layer, it starts to come back with a much better picture of the truth, which is that there are a good number of our customers who love print. For our best print-loving customers, we likely couldn't give them enough print, but we have invested in a lot of less expensive print in order to try and provide more print touches to those customers. And for the customers who are more focused online, you know, we use cookie data, first party cookie data, we use, and we use measured, and we combine all of those pieces together. So we'll know what they clicked on to come into our website. We'll know the last key code that they used when they checked out, and measured will help us get our arms around the incrementality and what did we really get for spending those dollars. And so, I mean, those are the pieces. And then, you know, the question after that is like, what do we control? You know, and we create all kinds of incentives, promotions within our channels that are driving customer behavior. And we have to really ask ourselves, are we in fact doing what it is that we think is best for our businesses? Because in many cases, we're creating the blind spots. You know, we're sending them print and then we're offering them a new incentive if they email sign up, or, you know, whatever behavior we might be encouraging. So yeah, that's kind of where we are.
Perfect. And Cara, before we go to you, I actually wanted to ask the audience what channel or what tools they're using to measure their effectiveness. So let's start another poll now. And so just let us know, when you're measuring your marketing effectiveness, are you using marketing mix modeling, multi-touch attribution, incrementality, matchbacks, using QR codes, vendor URLs, discount codes, Google Analytics? Just want to see how this audience compares to other audiences we've talked to. What are we seeing? A lot, you know, the bottom two of Google Analytics and the QR codes, vendor URLs, discount codes, really the building blocks seem to be really the slightly more popular than some of the more complex tools that we'll be getting into in a few minutes. Cara, your thoughts from, you know, talking to people, is this similar to what you're typically seeing?
Yeah, I think in general, this is probably a little different than some of the data that we know to be true. I think that the distribution in on the top four are around the same, it sounds like, that folks are using in terms of measuring their campaign effectiveness. And then we see a pop at the bottom on the QR codes and Google Analytics. I think that a lot of our brands are really focused on incrementality and understanding what the true causal impact, how is media actually changing the behavior of the person who is seeing it and actually causing them to make a purchase. So I know that a lot of brands are really interested in getting into this space, but haven't really had the tools or expertise in order to do so. But this makes me really happy to see that 28% of the folks on this panel of the folks on this webinar are actually using incrementality to measure campaign effectiveness. That's awesome. That's great.
Cool.
I do think that from a methodology perspective, you know, marketing mix models, this is something that was around for the past probably 20 to 30 years, right? This was originally invented for CPG brands to understand what is really working and not working across all of their different channels that they were activating in order to sell products like toothpaste and toilet paper and et cetera, right? So that is probably not as precise of a model, and it's sometimes considered to be not as causal of a model to be using to actually making decisions on your business. And then, of course, there's also last touch attribution, multi-touch attribution, incrementality. There's a variety of different measurement methods that people are using to run through their business. So happy to dive into any one of those, Ray, where you see fit.
Cool, and we'll get there in just a minute. You know, just in closing out sort of this conversation around kind of the individual channels, you know, one of the questions that we often hear from people who are on the digital side is, you know, wondering, you know, how do you measure the impact of direct mail or offline channels or radio or the like? And so just wanted to answer that question. And so one of the key things, you know, for those people who are really experts with their Google Analytics, their ATM codes and measuring sources of where people are coming from. One of the key things is that offline channels are using exactly those same technologies when looking at individual response rates. So if you get a direct mail piece, you can scan a QR code. Radio or TV or direct mail, you can have a phone number and you can track and you can know that this phone number only was on that particular ad, so you know where it came in from. Within URLs, you can have an ad that says www.abc.com/summer sale, and so you know it has something to do with the summer sale. Or you can do a personalized URL and you can know that it was John Smith who responded. People who like text, we've seen some really interesting results in terms of how high response rates are, people just being able to text, because some people can text more comfortably than they can talk. So, if that's your audience, text response works well. And even smart speakers are really growing as a way that people are reacting. And when we look at direct mail, kind of similar to what you guys were showing, that codes are the most common, but there's still a large number of people using some of matchback analysis or holdout and some of the other things. But that's, let's end the section sort of individual channels there. Now let's jump back into the whole idea of omnichannel. And Ellen, I know that you've touched on this a little bit, but can you tell us a little bit more about, when you're trying to make those decisions with, the tight advertising dollars that you have and deciding which channels it is, how you're making those decisions across the different channels?
We're taking all of the historical data that we have, but understanding that for the past 2 years, our data has been heavily impacted by COVID and very unusual patterns. And if we go back to 2019 to pre-COVID, it's not exactly the same universe as it is in 2022, 2023. So really, I mean, we're taking our past data and we're making the best plans that we can, and we're including rigorous testing in it. So if we're gonna do print campaigns throughout the season, we're gonna do universal holdout. We're gonna be able to look at that universal holdout by RFM and compare it to those who received 1 piece, received 2 pieces, received 3 pieces. If we're doing a solo mailing, we're going to be including just those very specific products that we're offering, and we're going to be looking at our holdouts within that grouping of products. If we're going to be doing a scale testing on social, we're going to be using measured, and they're going to be telling us, here are the geocodes that are statistically representative, and that's what our holdout is going to be. And they're going to set up the test, and we're going to analyze those results together.
Great. Now, Cara, you were talking a little bit earlier about all the different ways that one can assign credit to different channels. And, we've got a couple of slides here, so why don't we let you take people through this at a high level on this slide, and then we can go into a little bit more detail.
Sure. So many of you are probably very familiar, based on the poll, with all of these different attribution methodologies. I will just run through this slide quickly. This is just a definition slide. So when we talk about last touch attribution, this is what the platforms are actually reporting. So Facebook or Google, et cetera. So this is what they know to be true in terms of their last touch point in the customer journey. So oftentimes platforms can really inflate how much they're actually reporting on, because so many different platforms touch the customer journey. The second is multi-touch attribution. So this is where we're assigning credit to every single touch point in the customer journey. Of course, as we all know, this really had a heyday in the 2000s, I'd call it. But as privacy regulations continue to evolve, it's really hard now, or nearly impossible, to actually track a user across their entire purchase journey, across every single media touch point that they had across the walled gardens, TV, open web, et cetera. Incrementality is the attribution methodology or framework that Measured applies to making decisions in your business. So we have a set of automated experiments that you can run across all different tactics and channels across your portfolio to understand what is the true incrementality of and contribution of these media channels to your overall business. And from there, you can calculate what is the incremental ROAS, so profitability that wouldn't have happened without the media, and then make decisions on where you're going to further invest your marketing dollars. And then finally, there's a media mix modeling. Again, this is assigning credit by running a multivariate regression model. So we're looking at usually by week transactions, spend, impressions, and the model is trying to figure out, okay, when we had a spike in transactions, is that because of I had a spike in spend in this particular channel, et cetera. So this slide kind of dives into those methodologies a little bit deeper. I think that, where we really focus at Measured is that third column here on the incrementality. It's known to be the most precise. It's known to be the most accurate in terms of decision-making across your business. It's considered the gold standard for precision in terms of measurement. There is some limitations in terms of being able to get onboarded to incrementality and understanding where you're going to experiment across your entire portfolio. But generally, the benefits that you get from experimental methodology far outweigh the trade-off of actually onboarding onto it. So we highly suggest individual experiments. They're very accurate and specific, and you can customize them to meet your unique business needs. Generally, we have kind of two broad buckets of experimentation. We've got geo-matched market experimentation, which we usually use for prospecting type of use cases across digital channels. And then we've got a split audience testing product, which you can use across all of your customer file or your catalog and your direct mail, where we use a matchback methodology there as well. So super high level, those are kind of the different attribution options and why I would go with incrementality.
Cool. Yeah. And so, and we at the Postal Service, we're actually a fairly large advertiser as well. So we face this same challenge about how do you measure things. And, we've talked to lots of people about last touch attribution. And, I think that there, I got to highlight the fact that it's easy, which is why, most of these surveys say that, most people do it. The real problem with it is that it tends to say, where do you, what do you do last? But if you are seeing a TV ad, your radio ad, you see display ads, and then you go to a search engine, you type in www.macys.com. Well, Macy, all of that credit is going to the search engine, which is driven by something that was really driven before that. So that was kind of the simplest thing, but it has the biggest challenges on it.
That's
and then good.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, these media platforms, they're really good at counting conversions, but they're probably a little too generous with taking credit, right? So every single media platform is going to take 100% credit for any order that they potentially see. So you might see for a given week or time period, $15 million of sales that are being attributed by those platforms, but ultimately there's only $10 million of sales in your Shopify POS or whatever your e-commerce POS is. So trying to consolidate and figure out where those sales actually were driven from.
And then, multi-touch tries to get around that problem. And if you've got visibility into each and every one of your touches, that's great, and you can do it. Problem is, in many cases, people don't. And also, with the move towards privacy, some of the visibility that you might have had a couple of years ago is slowly drying up. So if this is working today, it may not work as well. Marketing mix modeling on the other side, tried and true, works. The challenge is that, and when we use it for part of our analysis ourselves, it tends to require a long tail of analysis. So if you want to look at a year, you're great. But if you want to understand what's happened in the last, couple of weeks, you just don't tend to have as much data. So lots of the issues there. And so just jumping in, one of the things that we have seen, and again, using some measured data, if you look at last touch versus the incremental ROAS, again, things like search engine, if you would just look at last touch data, it looks like it has by far the leading ROAS. Same thing with retargeting campaigns digitally. But when you then look more at an incremental level, some of those things really pare back much more than that. Any other comments on that, Cara?
Yeah, that's right. So if you were look at the blue bars on this graph, you would make a decision to fund your business with Google brand search, right? That's the decision you would make because that's what's driving the highest ROAS for you. But if you look at those metrics from an incremental perspective, the decision fundamentally changes, right? So you would fund your business in this case using catalog. And we're also able to really suss out some of the huge differences in terms of what the platforms report, those lower funnel channels that often take a lot of the credit during a purchase cycle. Google brand search, of course, retargeting takes a lot of credit. We're able to actually truly identify what's the true contribution of each of those channels so that you can make your decision more accurately and smartly.
So at Gardens Alive, we did an analysis recently where we looked at everybody who had clicked on a PLA, a product listing ad link. The first thing I'll share is that the dollars that Google Analytics reported was very close to equal to the first click on that link, as though every conversion was credited to them, but the numbers did tie out quite closely. And the idea of the analysis was we wanted to look at where we're bringing in new customers, what the cost of bringing in those new customers is, and what the value of those new customers are 18 months down the road. And what we found when we just looked at the people who are coming in through these product listing ads, around 35% of them were already our customers. It wasn't what we expected to see. And in many cases, we're spending money on print, and now we're spending money on clicks. And so it's so imperative to really understand the relationships between all of these different media tactics, marketing tactics, and understand what truly is driving that sale. And it's fine if we say that we want to use those product listing ads as a reactivation tool, but we need to do that with our eyes wide open. When we spend that money, we're certainly not envisioning that we're using it as a reactivation tool.
Perfect. And, so I think that this is kind of the way that the world is today, but I think that the future is going to change a little bit more so, even so, because, as cookies continue to deprecate, and there seem to be a number of different approaches on the horizon that you kind of read about in Ad Age and Ad Week, and they talk about different things, and every article seems, well, we made a little bit of incremental progress, but we're not sure if we're there yet. Cara, can you tell us a little bit more about what success some of these new approaches seem to be having?
Sure. So a lot of our brands are using a combination of incrementality testing and reporting, where they compare to different benchmarks across the industry or to their own category to make decisions on where they're going to move around their media investment and budgets. So they might find, for example, that their upper funnel channels tend to be more incremental because and lower funnel channels might be less incremental, right? This might be different from what they previously knew to be true. In those lower funnel channels, we're typically targeting users there that have a much higher propensity to buy. So figuring out, almost like what Ellen was talking about in terms of PLAs, understanding where the true impact from the media is coming from and using testing in order to uncover that. So a lot of our brands are using, again, both a combination of benchmarks, reporting, and incrementality testing to figure out exactly what the optimization strategy should be for their business. And it's unique to every single business.
So my last question for Cara before we open it up to the Q&A is, if I was to look at, Google or looking at Neustar or looking at Trade Desk, there seem to be a number of new identifiers or new approaches with clean rooms, or there's all of these different acronyms of flocks and other bird type acronyms that are out there that all have this hope of maybe we'll be able to measure things in the future with them. In talking to your clients, are any of your clients sort of seeing success or hope from some of these things, or are they still a long ways out?
We think that first-party data is one of the most valuable and likely underutilized resources at a lot of our brands. So a lot of our brands are starting to pivot and start thinking more and more about how to leverage their own first-party data and using that PII in order to be able to target individuals either in social media and email, SMS, or through the direct mail channel. We also use a matchback methodology and a clean room. So we're kind of part of that clique of people using pretty technological terms to solve these problems. But really, it's just about making sure that we have the most accurate measurement methodology possible to track these channels, and being able to track at the first party user level, and being able to track your own customers and what's actually happening is something that we do in a completely privacy safe environment through the clean room. So I think that that's probably the most important part for our advertisers right now. And yes, there are a lot of other buzzwords out in the industry like flocks and different unique single identifiers across different types of platforms. As our business continues to change and privacy regulations continue to evolve, that will still continue to be a struggle for a lot of these brands. If you get hooked on one of these types of new identifiers or methodologies, they could change as new privacy regulations evolve, right? We saw a lot of that with iOS 14 and other types of regulations. So again, a lot of our businesses are starting to pivot and start thinking about, okay, let me focus on my customer data. I really need to cultivate a relationship with my customers, make sure I'm targeting them in the right channels in the right ways with the right media so that I can ensure I have stable business growth through my own customer file, and ensure that I'm continuing to get that lifetime value out of those guys.
Great. So now we're going to open it up to looking at the Q&A from the Q&A tab. First question that we have is, my business is a subscription service where I try to get somebody once and try to keep them for a long time. Is the way to measure the effectiveness different in that kind of a business than in a business where you're trying to sell somebody multiple products and cross-sell and upsell?
Yeah, so a couple things. First, in terms of ensuring that your lead can actually convert to being a subscriber, you can apply a list-based type of methodology to figure out what is the optimal way to get those leads to convert into being subscribers. So you could take a set of your leads for the last month, the last 3 months, whatever it may be, randomize them into different test and control cells. And you might want to give one group all of the media vendors possible, one group only 2 vendors, one group only 1 vendor, and then hold a group out from seeing nothing. And then you can track the conversion rates of each of those groups and figure out, okay, in group 1, they converted at the highest rate to becoming a subscriber, versus group 3 converted at the lowest rate in terms of becoming a subscriber. But the sweet spot of conversion rate and response rate that we're seeing and profitability comes from that second group, for example. And so you can really make decisions around how you want to activate that leads to subscribers funnel. In terms of the ongoing subscribers and how you might want to continue to measure those, we have a fair amount of subscription businesses as well that use incrementality testing to understand on the lead side how to generate more leads. And then on the subscriber side, it's more about figuring out what combinations of media will continue to get these folks to renew, and ensuring that you're reducing the churn of those subscriptions. So what combinations of media, how do these people want to be talked to so that you can ensure retention and lower that churn rate?
Cool. Next question is, how does the channel mix differ between products where there's a short sales cycle and some of them are a little bit more complicated, that might have a longer sales cycle? And is it possible to measure effectiveness on both of those? Ellen, I know that you've got sold different products. Do you find a different need between some of those with different product characteristics?
Definitely. And, I mean, there's the initial ROAS, the marketing spend and the return on that spend. And there's also the lifetime value. And so like in our business with horticulture, we look at an 18-month window because we want the same season that they purchased in for them to have that opportunity a year later. When we look at the gift side of our business, 18 months doesn't make sense for that business. So we're looking at a 12-month window there. And more expensive items versus less expensive items, I mean, they all have different equations, but if you use the past data to kind of benchmark what is working and what isn't, then you have something to compare to as you move into new tactics.
And Cara, can you add to that? When you have some sort of very short versus very long-term cycle, does that impact how your clients are measuring effectiveness?
Absolutely, yeah. And different types of channels work better for longer purchase cycles with higher AOVs versus shorter purchase cycles with lower AOVs. And Ellen, to her credit, she's done a ton of incrementality testing with Measured, and she's really precise with the questions that she wants to answer. And so she's been able to really kind of figure out and dial in and nail exactly what is that right combination for Gardens Alive brands, I think, across both the AOV and the purchase cycle components. So we also work with a fair amount of other brands that have a much longer purchase cycle, and they're selling a very, very high value product. And so the mix of what channels that they get into and where they're testing and where they're trying to optimize their media spend looks very different.
Cool. Then we've got some questions in here around just sort of the mechanics of testing, with questions around, how large should the holdout groups be? And how large do the samples have to be before you can get statistically representative results? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Ellen, do you want to take it or do you want me to?
I think this one's for you.
Okay, great. So again, we've got two buckets of methodologies. We've got a geo-matched market methodology. So we have an advanced data science model that is going to go figure out what markets are the most like each other, so that we can say, okay, let's turn off media in these 5 markets and let's keep media running in these 10 markets, for example. We can compare the conversion rates of the 2 sets of markets, and then we can understand whether or not that media had an impact. So that's one of our 2 methodologies. The other methodology that we go after is and that methodology, the market selection, is all based on your transaction data. So what is the conversion volume and the response of each of those markets? So that's kind of other variables, of course, as well, too. But it's a custom model that's almost built for your business, and it's figuring out where you should be activating a geo experiment and how long those experiments need to run for. On the first party ID split side, so we can run an analysis to figure out how large those panels need to be. We typically suggest a 10% holdout on all prospecting campaigns, especially in the direct mail and digital space. And then on the house file side for a campaign, we typically suggest around a 5% holdout, but it really depends on the response rates across that house file, how often you're dropping, how large the populations are that we're sending to, and we can do a design of experiments to figure out whether or not you're going to see a statistically significant read based on the business question that you want to answer and the test design that we put out there.
And we have another question around test design. Somebody's asking, how complicated is it to do multiple tests in the same campaign? Could you talk, Ellen, you do a lot of testing. Can you talk about, your approach to doing multiple testing, or what kind of testing you've done?
Sure. I mean, my answer to that is you need to have your eyes wide open so that one test doesn't invalidate another test. So it's perfectly acceptable to be running multiple tests within a season, as long as they're not going to invalidate one another. So we might be doing a print holdout testing, and we might be doing a scale test on some of our search marketing efforts. And those can both coexist happily with one another. We did a test recently where one of our brands does a lot of selling on a third party. And we wanted to know whether the print that we invest in was creating sales for the third party or not. We didn't at the same time do a holdout test to see within the audience that we're mailing that catalog to whether we should be cutting back or expanding, because those tests would have stepped on each other. So just very conscious of the testing that you're doing.
Cool. And Cara, can you just finish us up by telling us your thoughts on how one can do all that most effectively?
Sure. I think in order to reduce contamination or leakage. It's just a matter of talking to an expert measured provider like Measured, and we can talk you through where you can overlap tests and where you cannot. But generally, the rule of thumb I like to think of is you just have to be considerate of audience overlap, right? So understanding if you're running multiple tests, you don't want to contaminate one audience with a media that's actually a holdout from a different audience, right? So that's it.
Perfect. So thank you again to Cara and to Ellen for sharing all of this great knowledge. We really appreciate it. We also appreciate all of you being here.
Thanks, guys.